Hello, I'm David Mello, the Supervisor of Children's Services here at the Fall River Public Library. And to celebrate the spooky season of Halloween, I have some spooky stories to share with you. Now, my first story is based on a very old Southern folk tale about a skeleton. And it's the skeleton of the meanest man who ever lived. His name is Aaron Kelly, and this is his story. The Dancing Skeleton by Cynthia DeFellis. Aaron Kelly was dead. There was nothing anyone could do about it. And to tell you the truth, nobody much cared. You see, Aaron had been so downright mean and rotten in his life that folks were actually glad to see him go. Even his widow never shed a tear. She just bought a coffin, put Aaron Kelly in it, and buried him. "Goodbye, Aaron Kelly," she said, "and good riddance." But that very night, Aaron got up out of his grave, walked through the graveyard, and came home. His widow was sitting in the parlor, thinking how peaceful and quiet it was without Aaron around, when he walked right in the door. "What's all this?" he shouted. "You're all dressed in black. You look like somebody just died. Who's dead?" The widow pointed a shaking finger at Aaron Kelly and said, "You are." "Oh, no, I ain't," hollered Aaron. "I don't feel dead. I feel fine." "Well, you don't look fine," said the widow. "You look dead. Now you just get yourself back in that coffin where you belong." "Oh, no," said Aaron. "I ain't going back to that coffin till I feel dead." Just plain ornery he was. Well, since Aaron wouldn't go back to the grave, his widow couldn't collect the life insurance. Without that money, she couldn't pay for the coffin. If she didn't pay for the coffin, the undertaker would take him back. And if he did that, she'd never be rid of Aaron. Aaron didn't care. He just sat in his favorite rocking chair, rocking back and forth, day after day, and night after night. But after a while, Aaron began to dry up. Pretty soon, he was nothing but a skeleton. Every time he rocked, his old bones clicked and clacked. His widow did her best to ignore him, but it wasn't easy with all the racket he was making. Then, one night, the best fiddler in town came to call on Aaron's widow. He heard Aaron was dead, and he thought he might marry the woman himself. The fiddler and the widow sat down together, cozy like on the bench, and old Aaron sat right across from them, just a creaking and cracking and grinning. Fiddler said, "Woman, how long am I going to have to put up with that old bag of bones sitting there? I can't court you proper with him staring at me like that." Widow answered, "I know. But what can I do?" The fiddler shrugged, the widow sighed, the clock ticked, and Aaron rocked. Finally, Aaron said, "Well, this ain't any fun at all. Fiddler, take out your fiddle. I feel like dancing." So the fiddler took out his fiddle and he began to play. My, could he make that fiddle sing? Aaron Kelly heard the sweet music, and he couldn't sit still. He stood up. Ooh, his dry bones were stiff. He stretched himself. He shook himself. He cracked his knuckle bones. And he began to dance. With his toe bones a-tapping and his feet bones a-flapping, round and round he danced like a fool. With his finger bones a-snapping and his arm bones a-clapping, how that dead man did dance. The music grew wilder, and so did Aaron, until suddenly a bone broke loose from the dancing skeleton, flew through the air, and landed on the floor with a clatter. "Oh my!" the fiddler cried. "Look at that! He's dancing so hard, he's falling apart." "Well then," said the widow, "play faster." The fiddler played faster. Bones began flying every which way, and still that skeleton danced. "Play louder!" cried the widow. The fiddler hung to that fiddle. He fiddled a tune that made the popcorn pop. He fiddled a tune that made the bedbugs hop. He fiddled a tune that made the rocks get up and dance. Crickety-crack, down and back, old Aaron went a-hoppin', his dry bones a-poppin', flippin' and floppin', they just kept droppin'. Soon, there was nothing left of Aaron but a pile of bones lying still upon the floor, all except for his old bald head bone, and that looked up at the fiddler, snapped its yellow teeth, and said, "Ooh-wee, ain't we having fun?" Well, it was all too much for the fiddler. He dropped his fiddle, said, "Woman, I'm getting out of here," and ran out the door. The widow gathered up Aaron's bones and carried them back to the graveyard. She put them in the coffin and mixed them all around in there so Aaron could never put himself back together again. And after that, Aaron Kelly stayed in his grave where he belonged. But folks say that if you walk by the graveyard on a still summer night when the crickets are fiddling their tunes, you'll hear a faint clicking and clacking down under the ground, and you'll know it's Aaron's bones still trying to dance. And what about the fiddler and the woman? Well, they never did get back together after that. Old Aaron made dead sure of that. And that's the dancing skeleton. My next spooky story is also an old tale, and it has a good lesson to it, not to take things that don't belong to you. And this story is called Who Took My Hairy Toe? Retold by Shutta Crumb. On All Hallows Eve, when the wind is whipping through the gap and the trees are scratching the sky, the folks around here say you can hear Old Tar Pockets screaming. Old Tar Pockets was not his real name. That was long forgotten. Some say he was just an old man living up the holler, away from all the other folk. But they also say he was a greedy old man, even that it wasn't safe to say howdy to him without taking a good old hold of your hat. He met his ruination one Halloween. You see, he was prospecting for a little something handy by his neighbor's barn while the neighbor was tarring his roof. By the barn sat an open bucket of warmed up tar. "I'd like to get me some of that tar," he thought. "Might come in right handy sometime." Well, the old man looked around but couldn't find anything to put it in. So when his neighbor wasn't looking, he dipped a stick full of that soft, warm tar out of the bucket and plopped it right into his coat pocket. That's how he got his name, Old Tar Pockets. Then he spied a few scraggly sweet potato plants, the last of the season, in his neighbor's garden. So Old Tar Pockets began to dig, and he dug up a hairy toe. It was big and covered with coarse brown fur with a long yellow toenail curving over the end. Well, the old man wasn't sure what he would do with it, but he did hold with the old saying, "Finders keepers." So he took that toe and stuffed it into his pocket. Old Tar Pockets carried home those stolen golden sweets and cooked himself up a mess of greens and taters for supper. Then he remembered he had the toe. He reached into his pocket, but couldn't pull it out. You see, the tar had cooled down and hardened up a bit, and that toe was stuck fast. In fact, the old man couldn't get his hand out. His hand was stuck to the tar on the toe, and the toe was stuck to the tar in his pocket. Old Tar Pockets decided to get ready for bed. Tomorrow, when the sun was out, he'd warm up his jacket, soften up the tar, and pull everything out as slick as he pleased. But just then, the wind began to rise and whistle round the windows. Outside, the trees began to jerk about and claw at the sky. And Old Tar Pockets heard a question on the voice of the wind. It hissed about the corners of the house. It asked, "Who took my hairy toe?" The old man opened the door and stared out into the dark woods beyond the house. "Ah, it's just my imagination," he thought, and turned to shut the door. And then he heard it again, louder and closer. "Who took my hairy toe?" Quickly, he closed and barred the door with his free hand. He latched the windows and pulled the curtains. It was dark in the little house. Still, the wind came in through the chinks in the walls. He could hear the question again and again, louder and louder, and coming closer. "Who took my hairy toe? Who took my hairy toe?" Old Tar Pockets raked out the fire and stopped up the chimney with rags. Nothing was getting inside tonight. But he heard the voice again, this time coming from just outside the door. my hairy toe. Standing wide-eyed in the center of the room, the old man heard scratching at the latch and the clacking of claws beginning to draw down the wood on the door. Old Tar Pockets jumped into bed and yanked up a quilt over his head. But he could still hear the question, first at one window and then the other. Who took my hairy toe? Who took my hairy toe? Suddenly, a mountain-bending shriek of wind blew against the old house with such force that the door cracked and lay in two pieces, gaping wide open. Just as quickly as the wind died down, in the hush that followed, the old man could hear his heart beating, and he could hear the thump, scritch, thump, scrape, thump of heavy feet approaching his bed in the dark. Who took my hairy toe? Old Tar Pockets couldn't take it any longer. He sat up in bed and stared at the darkness he had never ever known before. Two fiery red eyes stared back. Then he smelt the foul breath and felt the sharp claws as the beast reached toward him. The old man flipped back those covers with one free hand and cried, "Here! Here it is! I've got it in my pocket! Take it!" The great beast moaned. It had found its hairy toe, but the toe was stuck in Old Tar Pocket's pocket. With a shriek, the great red-eyed beast grabbed the old man and, tucking him under his arm, ran out of the house and into the October night. Now, when ghosts and goblins haunt the hills and the wind is rising in the treetops, they say you can hear the shrieks of the angry beast. If you listen carefully, you can hear the old man's screams too, as the beast and the man wander the valleys and ridges of the mountains together. The kindly folk here say, "Pay no, never mind. It's just Old Tar Pockets getting his due." I say, just as long as what's in your pocket is yours, I wouldn't worry about it. And that's the story of Who Took My Hairy Toe. Are you brave, dear listeners? Well, if you are, come take a trip with me inside the haunted house. Take a deep breath. Here we go. The Haunted House, a seriously spooky pop-up book. The haunted house comes alive at night because ghosts and spooks love twilight. They're in the windows, behind the doors, climbing the stairs, and under the floors. And just look at them in the haunted house. We have vampires, witches, owls, and ghosts. Watch out for Werewolf. He's really hairy. In the dark hallway, looking scary. Green Ghoul hides behind the stairs. Zombies are coming. Help! I'm scared. Dare we go on? Let's dare. Out in the garden, Ghosts like to play only by night and never by day. Their favorite game is hide and go seek. When they are found, they let out a shriek. I think I found one. Oh, I found another one. Ooh, there are two hiding behind that gravestone. This witch has a hairy nose and warts that are as big as your toes. And now, she says, it's potion time with eyeballs, bones, and green slime. Ooh, should I taste it? Let me see. Not very good. Down in the dungeon, the bats hang out. In the darkness, they fly about. Mr. Vampire wakes up at night. Better watch out, for he may just bite. And that was our trip in the haunted house. We both made it out, didn't we? And now it's time for an eerie, fiery feeling. A hairy, scary pop-up book. Ooh, there's an eerie, fiery feeling when the ghouls and goblins glide, when the flapping bats are diving and the wicked witches ride. There's a hairy, scary feeling when the owls hoot at the moon and the cats along the fence post meow a mournful tune. There's a spooky, kooky feeling when black cauldrons boil and bubble, stirring up a double dose of snakes and toads and trouble. There's a quaky, shaky feeling when the wind wails through the trees, when the silver shadows shiver and the banshees shriek with glee. There's a chilly, thrilly feeling when the hairy spiders spin, when skeletons are dancing and the jack-o'-lanterns grin. There's a mostly ghostly feeling when the air is fraught with fright and wild spirits haunt old houses. Halloween is here tonight. And that's an eerie, fiery feeling. And if you enjoy these spooky stories, I encourage you to visit the Fall River Public Library. We have lots and lots of them here for you. So come prepare for Halloween with some great scary stories to read and share.